The novelty of a Ferrari race car built in low production that you can drive on the street is exceptionally desirable. I get about a dozen emails a day from different people around the internet asking me what cars they should invest in that are going to either appreciate or hold their value or whatever the case may be. And actually 3 years ago this month, I put out my first list of investment cars that I would advise people to buy right now that are exotic, not necessarily older collector cars, but the kind of things we talk about a lot here that I deal in fairly frequently that have a likelihood of appreciating. And the list honestly hasn't changed that much, although in 2015 when I released the first version, we were sort of at what some people have called a peak in the collector car market. And certainly there are cars like Carrera GTs that were more expensive then than they ever have been before or since. But at the same time, the market has continued to be very healthy. Some of the declines that we've seen in cars like Countach's are really based more on the competition for collector dollars than the true values of the cars relative to other things people can buy. Your blue chip stuff has continued to go up. We'll continue to see extremely expensive older Aston DB cars, Mercedes 300 SLs, Ferrari 250s. In fact, I think in Monterey this year we'll see the most expensive car ever sold at auction in the upcoming 250 GTO. But the cars that I had on the list then, I think still reflect very good buys. So all of them, in addition to some others, are on this current list. Are they going to beat the stock market or other traditional investments? Probably not on a truly long-term time frame, but at the same time, it can be a very inexpensive thing to enjoy, to own, to drive, and have a lot of fun with, which is always what I advise. And the first just kind of set of cars that I would advise are manual V12 Aston Martins. Certainly the DB7 GT and the manual DB9 are good ones to consider, but they don't have quite the following that the Vantage and the DBS, obviously with the James Bond affiliation, have. And even though Aston Martin has said they're committed to continue offering manual cars, when you source your drivetrains from Mercedes-Benz, you don't always have control over that. So right now you cannot buy a manual Aston Martin, even though there's some rumors that there might be some in the future. Regardless, Aston's doing great things with the Valkyrie and some of their other cars, so the brand panache is going to be maintained, and the exclusivity and the desirability of manuals is not going anywhere. And you don't necessarily have to buy the newest V12 Vantage S, although those are great and they're even more limited. The 2010 to 2012 V12 Vantages are fantastic cars, and the 09 to 12 manual DBSs are excellent cars to own. I would advise a Casino Royale Gray 09 with the carbon door caps in a manual with the Alcantara interior, just like the one that was in Casino Royale. Right now you could pick one up for about 100 to 125 grand, and it's probably never ever going to be worth less than that in its life. The next car is the 2008 and 9 Porsche 997 GT2. Now this is the only Porsche that I have on this list, although I would give honorable mention to a 996 GT2. The 997 GT2 is actually the rarest modern Porsche brought to the US. In fact, there were supposedly only 195 US cars built, with just over 1,200 cars built for the world. So when we look at the production numbers of 911Rs, GT3RSs, the new manual GT3s, they all vastly exceed this low quantity of rear-wheel drive manual turbocharged Porsches. Without a back seat, everything that you generally like about a Porsche GT car, these things have, and they're very rare. They're even more rare than the GT2 RS that came out after it just a few years later. So I would say that these cars in either year with any miles are an excellent investment car, but it does hinge on the continuation of people to be building their Porsche collections. Now as driver cars, I think they're the best driving Porsches built in that decade. But people are always going to have their preferences, for GT3s and RSs and things like that. But it's a pretty surefire bet that you'll always be able to find someone who paid more than you did if you pick one of those up. The next car is actually one of my personal favorite investment exotics, and it's the Lotus Exige. I love the price point, I love what it is, and I love the fact that it really can't be recreated now with modern safety standards and the weight that just all cars are required to carry. But particularly the Exige S260, which was available in sort of two generations, is an extremely rare car that's a great performance car, a lot of fun to drive, reasonably inexpensive consumables. And while I talked about kind of the weirdness of some of the Lotus markets, the Exige represents a terrific investment opportunity. And right now you can pick one up for kind of anywhere from about 50 grand up to maybe 80, And in my opinion, they're great at any of those price points. There's just over 1,100 Exesias that ever came to the US, and there's 48 and 56 of the two generations of the 260. So either of those that you get, you're getting something that is exceptionally rare, very worth owning, and an enjoyable car to really spend time with. This is also a car that has a lot less elasticity to mileage, meaning the change in mileage doesn't change the price as drastically as you'd see with some other exotics. And I love driving cars and putting a lot of miles on them, so if you wanted to do that, this is a terrific choice. The next one may not be considered an exotic car, but it's certainly interesting, and it's one that I really like, and it's a Hummer H1. I don't know that I'd ever own one for the sake of driving it, but they're rare enough, and a lot of them are bad enough, and that a really good example, or one that's been properly modified with the right newer parts and things like that and gone through, is a car that you can own well and make money on. Some of these expedition prepped cars that have all the racks and lights and everything are bringing really, really strong money right now, and I think if you buy a nice one, maintain it well, and over time make it a cooler version of itself, it's a car I think you do really, really well on, and that somebody's going to continue to affectionately maintain, drive, and restore for years to come. The next car will come as no surprise, but it is manual transmission Murcielagos. Most Diablos as well, and even E-Gear Murcielagos, I think all represent a tremendous investment opportunity in the exotic car space. And that's because of the rarity, of the desirability, of the fact that the people who loved them when they first came out are sort of coming into the ability to buy collector cars, which has always been one of those triggers to make cars go up in value. But people are noticing that rare Lamborghinis are considerably more rare than anything else that we're told is rare. So we've talked a lot about the manual LP640s, which I think you could never lose on, and I certainly haven't myself. But even E-Gear LP640s, E-Gear early Murcielagos, and certainly the early sticks are definitely starting to climb. As I've accumulated the VINs of different Murcielagos on VINwiki, it's amazing how many of them have been badly modified, damaged, totaled, exported, written off in some way. And so the number of good cars remaining is certainly dwindling each year, and that means that the ones that are still there that you can still drive and use are going to continue to go up in value. The same is true for the Diablos, particularly the 94 SEs, the SVs, the Roadsters, and the 6.0s. The early VTs and the two-wheel drive cars early in the model run are nice, and certainly there is a demand for them, but nobody really wants to spend an awful lot of time driving them, and right now most car collectors are focusing on cars they can drive. There's always this looming fear that 20, 30, 40 years from now, in certain areas, driving may be outlawed, and as that kind of fear penetrates some of these larger car collectors, it ends up causing them to liquidate a lot of the cars that they don't drive. You're starting to see that advice coming from a lot of car market books, publications, magazines, and things like that. So the right Diablo is going to continue to bring the right money, and we're starting to see more of a focus on the driver quality Countaches that don't immediately need a lot of work than we are on some of the low mile collector stuff that's just set around for forever. The next thing is really a set of cars, and it's the cars that were really cool at the turn of the millennium, because there were a lot fewer cool cars in the year 2000 than there are right now. And so when you look back on the cars that we all loved back then as we were impressionable youths, it's important to look at what will make them go up and who's looking for them in the future. Certainly this would include something like a really nice comp package, good color, sunroof delete, manual, cloth interior E46 M3. You could pay whatever it takes for that car with low miles now and make money in the future. Same for a really good M5, maybe even an E39 modified by Dynan, an S4 Avant with a manual, particularly in Nogaro blue or a good color like that. Even a 911 Turbo, the 996 Turbo, which has always kind of been seen as unloved, but with the Metzger motor and everything that's good about that car, if you get over the headlights, it's a terrific car to own, and I think they will continue to go up, particularly good, clean, as original as possible examples. The next car that I love is a Mercedes McLaren SLR. Last year I got very dangerously close to having bought one that was in a flood, and it was going to be a great deal, but I think all the cars are really undervalued for what they are. There is some scary maintenance sort of looming out there that they can, suddenly cost you about $30,000 to continue driving, but at the same time I think they represent a car like an XJ220 or an Aston Martin DB5 10 or 15 years ago that you'd see people driving and not necessarily believe this was something that was about to go to the moon, but that might end up doing so. The next one I think might be a little bit of a long shot, but I think the potential reward on it is very, very strong, and that's Ferrari challenge cars from the late 90s. We all knew that 1995 Ferrari challenge cars were going to go to the moon because it was the only year in the US that the 355s were street legal. All 348 challenge cars were street legal because the challenge package was installed to a Berlinetta or a TS by your dealer. So you had a real car with a real title that you could really go and register. And the novelty of a Ferrari race car built in low production that you can drive on the street is exceptionally desirable. So I think that the later 355 challenge cars and the 360s from the 99-2001 kind of run have the good potential to become very valuable as they turn 25 years old and they can come into the US and be titled for street use, because in most of the rest of the world, particularly in England, you could drive these cars on the road to different events, multi-stage rallies and stuff like that. So you'll see them with number plates advertised for sale in the UK, and even if it's a US car, it might go on vacation and come back in a few years. So the cars that you can look at, there aren't a ton of late 90s cars that I think are just going to skyrocket as they become accessible to the US market, but this is one that I think has a good shot. The next car I really like is a Ferrari 550 Maranello, and I had it on my list back then and I still love them. I think that it's just one of the most beautiful and understated modern Ferraris in that Daytona and 275 kind of sense of their design language that I think long-term goes up really well. Also, it's one of the last Ferraris that was made in entirely a manual transmission. So we're not having to deal with a discrepancy between what a paddle shift car and a manual car do. I think other manual Ferraris, 360s, 430s, things like that are going to continue to do well, but I think the 550s represent just a great car at 100 to 100 and a quarter right now that you could drive really well. They do have belt services and things like that, but as there's more competition in independent shops and more people that have retired from full-time gigs at Ferrari dealers and they're servicing some of the vintage cars, I think it represents a tremendous value. The last car is something that I've been touting for a while, and that is Spykers. I think they are just wonderful cars. They're terrific cars to drive. The Audi drivetrain is great, sounds great, steers well, handles well, is really a simple construction of a car. The electronic system is a little bit complex and can be a little bit problematic, but a nice original car, of which there's less than 300 ever built for the world, to me is a great car that has the potential to go 5 to 10x over the next 10 to 15 years. Who's to say they will? It takes a pretty strong demand to keep those cars moving, and obviously a lot of people who own them right now have fairly low cost bases, so it's kind of hard to know exactly when that's all going to kick in, but at some point we're all going to say we wish we had bought Spykers. And honestly, if I could build an index and just buy one of each of these and then let you all buy shares, I think we'd all make money. At the end of the day, I think if you do own one, hold it for a little while, make it nicer through the time that you own it and maintain it well, I think you do get a chance to make some good money on the car. Obviously, they don't have warranties, they can be expensive to maintain, but the appreciation should at the very least offset your holding cost and maintenance costs, which should really be the goal. And you could say that most of these cars have already gone up in the last few years, and that's probably true. It's going to cost you more to buy any of them today than it would have when I first released a similar list back in 2015. But as you continue to look and as you continue to see, they're still going to climb. And a lot of the increased values, a lot of the maybe inflated values or appreciated values, whatever you want to say, are really not that solid. Certainly there are auction examples, high-end examples that do transact at these high levels, but that doesn't mean being an immediate buyer in the market for a car doesn't mean you can't truly negotiate your way into a better than advertised deal on a car that you really want, because money now is always better than theoretical money when the cars continue to become more valuable. So don't be afraid to make a strong, hard offer that demonstrates that you're ready to make a deal today to buy the car that you really want, and you'll probably end up having it in the garage.